Good afternoon. Welcome to Chile's 2020 Trade and International Affairs Symposium. I'm Marianne Gomez Orta, President and CEO of the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. The Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute is the premier organization founded by members of Congress to advance the Hispanic community's economic progress with a focus on social responsibility and global competitiveness. We are dedicated to fostering a broad awareness of the diversity of thought, heritage, interests, and views of Americans of Hispanic and Portuguese descent. Chile prepares and connects and honors leaders through internships, scholarships, and conferences that involve public service, leadership development, business, and academic excellence. We traditionally hold our Trade and International Affairs Symposium during Hispanic Heritage Month. But this year, due to COVID-19, we are with you today in a virtual program. First, a special thank you to our sponsors, UPS, Walmart, Google, and BP America. Join in today's program by sharing with others and each other using our Chile hashtag, #ChileTrade. As the world has become more connected, today's program focuses on trade in the new era. We are excited to hear from top trade leaders, President Mauricio Claver Carone of the Inter-American Development Bank, Chair Jason E. Kearns of the United States International Trade Commission, and Acting Administrator John Barsa of the U.S. Agency for International Development. Thank you to each of you for honoring us with your presence, your participation, and perspectives. To share a bit about today's format, we will start with remarks by Chile founder and chairman, the Honorable Lincoln Diaz Balart. But then we will be followed by comments from our Chile congressional members, Senator Scott, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, and Representative Henry Cuellar. Then President Claver Carone will share his vision for the IDB and then Chair Kearns will share his perspectives. Then John Barsa of the USAID will have a conversation with our Chile Trade Symposium Chair, Omar Franco of Becker and Polikoff. We will wrap up today's program with an industry perspectives led by a moderator and have a conversation with industry leaders in some key areas. We have reserved time for questions and answers during the panel discussion. For the panel, please make sure if you have any questions to put them in the Q&A and not in the chat, please. So now to get started, I'm going to start by introducing the chairman of Chile. Lincoln Diaz-Balart represented the 21st District of Florida in Congress for 18 years. He was the first Hispanic in history to be named to the powerful House Rules Committee. He was the author of the Nicaraguan Adjustment and Central Relief Act of 1997, which granted legal residency to thousands and thousands of immigrants in the United States who were at risk for deportation. He has received awards from a variety of countries for his humanitarian work. He has worked tirelessly to make Chile the organization that it is today, and his continued leadership and support has solidified our organization as one of the most well-respected bipartisan institutes in Washington, D.C. Now, please join me in a warm welcome to Chile Chairman, former Congressman, attorney, consultant, and human rights advocate, Lincoln Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Marianne, for those kind words. I'm very proud of you and Chile's staff and what you accomplish day in and day out. You know, when we formed Chile back in 2003, one of the pillars, one of the reasons that we came together to create what we thought was, and fill what we thought was an important void in the Hispanic world in the United States, was our support of free and fair trade, of international trade, among free and fair peoples, free peoples, and especially in our hemisphere. We believe that free and fair trade among free peoples will benefit no one more than the Hispanic community in the United States. The Hispanic community in the United States will benefit each day from the job creation that free and fair trade brings and will continue to bring. as obviously citizens from throughout our hemisphere will benefit and continue to benefit from the job creation that free trade will bring. And so we're proud of this symposium, now our 9th, that today is being held, and very grateful to our honored guests, distinguished panel that will speak later. And as you mentioned, our honored guests, Chairman Kearns, President Mauricio Claver Carone, and Administrator Barsa. We're deeply grateful to them for their participation today, and in fact, honored. And so welcome to our 9th, to the 9th Trade Symposium put on by the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. For us, it's a privilege to be able to host each and every one of you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. And now we will hear from our congressional members of our board, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, Representative Mario Diaz Balart of Florida, and Representative Henry Cuellar of Texas.
Hi, I'm Senator Rick Scott. I'm honored to join you in recognizing the importance of the Hispanic community in Florida and across our nation. America is in a fight on a global scale. Florida is the gateway to Latin America and the global hub for business. I have had the opportunity to travel across Latin America with the goal of continuing to build our trade relationships across Latin America. We have a lot of work to do to end ruthless dictatorships. We have to stop Communist China from dominating the global economy, and we have to stop Communist China from supporting oppressive regimes in Latin America. We have the opportunity to lead the nation, and I look forward and am honored to partner with the Hispanic community.
Thank Chile for hosting this event. I want to start off by also congratulating Mauricio Claver Carone for his ascending to the new presidency of the Inter-American Development Bank. Congratulations, Mauricio. I want to thank the sponsors too, the good folks at Walmart and UPS and Google and America. I'd like to spend just a couple minutes talking about the importance of trade within our hemisphere, within the Western Hemisphere, with the democracies in our hemisphere. The COVID pandemic showed us just how dangerous it is to have to depend on Communist China for things that are important, things that are essential, like medical devices. So that's why trade and increasing trade within our hemisphere is not only good for their economies, the economies of the democracies in this hemisphere, for our economy, but also I would tell you for our national security interests. And let's just look at Florida. Florida is home to nearly 60,000 exporters, the second highest number in the entire country. International trade supports 2.4 million jobs in Florida. Those are good paying jobs in Florida. I'm thrilled that the United States replaced the NAFTA deal, which actually was a pretty bad deal, particularly for Florida, with the new US-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA. That agreement, again, though it's not perfect, it opens up markets for our farmers and our manufacturers. We must always protect the production capability of the United States, protect our workers here as well from unfair trade practices from countries like China, or from burdensome regulation and taxation that put our exporters at a disadvantage. Again, increasing trade with our hemisphere, with the democracies in our hemisphere, is good for our economy and for our national security. I want to thank Chile for allowing me these minutes to spend with you on a very, very important issue to our entire country.
Hello, my name is Congressman Henry Cuellar. First of all, I want to thank all of you for having me here at the Chile Trade and International Affairs Symposium. I also want to give a special thanks to Walmart, UPS, Google, BP America for sponsoring today's event. Also, congratulations, Mauricio, on becoming the new president of the Inter-American Development Bank. I look forward to working with you and improving lives for Latin America and the Caribbean. We live in a global economy where so much of our economy, our economic growth, our job creation is fueled by trade. As someone who lives on the border, I can see this every day. According to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, nearly $1.7 billion in goods flow across the border every day. That's nearly $1 million every single minute. Laredo's inland port creates more than 360,000 net Texas jobs and contributes over $52 billion to the state's GDP. The passage of NAFTA 2.0 or USMCA last year only enhanced the historic trade flow that I see in my district. However, we don't just need strong trade policy. We need innovation in the technology, in the manufacturing, in the agricultural history. The history of trade reflects ongoing march of new innovations. After the second industrial revolution, for example, the introduction of steamships, of railroads changed the economies of trading across national borders. We've seen that. We have to learn from the past. We have to learn from history, and we have to be better. This year has been a very difficult year for international trade. The spread of the coronavirus has affected production, disrupted supply chains, and depressed the consumer demand. The consumer demand that's so important. However, today's trade symposium is more important than ever. We must all come together, create a new vision, a new game plan for trade, because it would help us reopen our global economy. I want to thank all of you for this great opportunity to be here with you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Thank you again to our congressional members. And now I'm going to introduce our chairman of our Trade and International Affairs Symposium, Mr. Omar Franco. Omar is the managing director at Becker and Poliakoff. He represents Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, higher education institutions, trade associations, nonprofits, and municipal governments. Most recently, he was recognized by the National Institute for Lobbying and Ethics as one of the top 2020 lobbyists. He is active in organizations at the regional and national level, a former president and current member of the Hispanic Lobbyists Association and member of the National Board of Trustees for the League of Minority Voters. He started his career in government and public service in 1993 as a district legislative assistant in Florida. Omar, the floor is yours, dear.
Thank you so much, Marianne, and thank you everyone who's joining us. I think very happy with everyone who's agreed to participate in our symposium today. So I'm here to introduce Chair Jason Kearns. So Jason Kearns is a Democrat from Kingsburg, Colorado. He was nominated to the U.S. International Trade Commission by President Obama and then renominated by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate in March 2018 for a 6-year term. In June of this year, he was officially designated as the chair for the commission for a 2-year term. Currently, the USITC is headed by 5 commissioners with 1 vacancy and provides independent and nonpartisan expertise on trade issues. By statute, no more than 3 commissioners may be of any one political party. Prior to his nomination, Chair Kearns served as a trade consul for 11 years on the Democratic staff of the House Ways and Means Committee, and the last 5 years as the Chief International Trade Consul. He worked for the committee Democratic leadership under Reps Charlie Rangel, Sander Levin, and Richard Neal. Before that, Jason Kearns was Assistant General Counsel for the U.S. Trade Representative, where he represented the United States in disputes at the World Trade Organization. Early in his career, he did spend time in private practice at Mayer Brown and what's now Wilmer Hale. He received his bachelor's at the University of Denver, his law degree from Penn Law, and his Master of Public Policy from Harvard. So, and like I said earlier, we met briefly while he was over at the Ways and Means Committee, and he was one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever come across in trade. So when asked to chair the symposium, I said, my #1 ask would be if you would join us, Chair Kearns. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Omar, for your very kind words. I appreciate that. Let me note that I'm speaking in my personal capacity today, and my views are not necessarily the views of the U.S. International Trade Commission. I want to briefly describe the work we do at the Commission, share some lessons from my time working on the House Ways and Means Committee, and then share some thoughts on the future of U.S. trade relations with Latin America. The commission has a staff of just over 400 people. By statute, as Omar mentioned, we have 6 commissioners, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and we serve a wide variety of functions. On issues like whether to restrict unfairly traded imports, we apply the law that Congress enacts, just like judges do. But we also serve as a government think tank on trade issues. For example, we analyze the economic impact of the US-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, or USMCA, on the US economy to give members of Congress the information they needed to vote on that agreement last year. The Commission generally does not make policy. It helps inform policy through economic studies, and it helps implement policy by adjudicating trade disputes and by doing other things like maintaining the tariff schedule. The common theme is that Congress and the administration turn to us when they need bipartisan and independent assistance from trade experts. As trade has become much more controversial, the Commission's work has become much more critical than ever before in our 104-year history. As a result, we have a record high workload across all mission areas. Unfortunately, our resources have not kept pace. So if there are any appropriators out there in the audience, please take note. As Omar mentioned, I served on the trade staff of the House Committee on Ways and Means for about 11 years, from 2006 through 2017. My time there in 2008 and 2009 is particularly relevant today. In 2008, I was serving the Democrats in the majority under a Republican president, President Bush, just as the Democrats today hold the majority under President Trump. Then in the next year, 2009, the Democrats continued to hold the House majority, but now under a Democrat, President Obama. So the situation may be somewhat similar to the House now and next year. I won't try to predict what will happen next year. As a commissioner on an independent commission, I won't be involved in those policy decisions. But 3 lessons stand out from my own experience on Capitol Hill. The first lesson is well known already. Like foreign policy more generally, trade doesn't tend to be a high priority at the beginning of a new administration. In 2009, the main priority was the Affordable Care Act, for example. Next year, 2021, may be a little different, as there are a number of outstanding trade issues, such as the duties on imports from China and on steel and aluminum, as well as reform of the World Trade Organization and ongoing trade negotiations, including with Kenya and the United Kingdom. Still, in my experience, those who focus exclusively on trade may not be on the center stage at the outset of the new Congress and new administration. My second lesson is, to some extent, contradicts the first. In my experience, big, regularly scheduled events help to focus an administration's attention. The Summit of the Americas is a good example. It convenes every 3 years. Next year, the United States will host the Summit of the Americas for the first time since 1994, in Florida in 1994. In April of 2009, just 3 months after the inauguration, I joined a congressional delegation to the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad and Tobago. This was President Obama's first meeting with his American counterparts. That was a very exciting time, as our neighbors in Latin America were eager to know how the president would handle a variety of issues affecting Latin America, including relations with Cuba. That summit was a great personal experience for me too. I'll never forget eating Caribbean barbecue at picnic tables outside a roadside grill in sweltering heat, sweaty business suits and ties with some very impressive and fun members of Congress, including Charlie Rangel, Sandy Levin, Javier Becerra, and Nydia Velasquez. Next year, I expect the summit will once again help to focus the administration's attention on Latin America. Cooperation will be needed on a variety of trade and economic issues with Latin America, including the COVID response, like the vaccine distributions, climate change, and immigration policy. My final lesson is an observation about the marriage dynamic between a Democratic president and a Democratic House majority. In my experience, the president's allies in the House are more than happy to accept White House leadership, but they also expect the administration to consult and work very closely with them. That may not always happen the way House members expect it to. There's a delicate dance between the White House and their allies in Congress, and presidents don't always come to the dance with those who brought them, as the saying goes. The president may instead try to work with moderates in the other party. It's good to recognize that going in. Finally, I wanted to share some thoughts on trade with Latin America. Unlike some of you, I am not an expert on Latin America, but I have been involved in negotiations and analyzing agreements with Central America, Colombia, Peru, and the USMCA. Before turning to Latin America, the first question is, how do US policymakers assess trade policy? What is the objective from a US perspective? President Trump's trade representative, Ambassador Lighthizer, has noted that the purpose of trade policy should not be simply to advance US foreign policy or to narrowly seek nothing but small efficiency gains. Instead, and I quote him, "What most Americans want is something else, a trade policy that supports the kind of society they want to live in. To that end, the right policy is one that makes it possible for most citizens, including those without college educations, to access the middle class through stable, well-paying jobs, to balance the benefits of trade liberalization with policies that prioritize the dignity of work." That isn't how the goal has always been described, but it did sound like my former boss, Ways and Means Chairman Neal, who earlier this week told the Financial Times he expects the president-elect's trade policy will be pro-worker. In fact, there is a new and growing consensus that success is measured by its impact on American workers and the middle class. There's also a growing recognition that US policies have fallen short in the past. Trade has contributed to growing inequality in the United States. Too many workers have lost jobs and others have had to accept pay cuts under the threat that their jobs would move overseas. That's only part of the story, of course. Trade has also had tremendous benefits, but it's a pretty important part and one that for too long has been swept under the rug. The next question is, how do US trade policymakers view trade relations with our Latin American partners? Trade negotiations are too often viewed as a situation in which one country gains at the expense of the other. In my view, that is wrong, and so is looking at trade agreements as serving monolithic interests in each country. No country has monolithic interests. What may be a good trade policy for one group in the United States may be a bad trade policy for another. This leads me to a pleasant surprise. As a general rule, what is good for workers in Latin America is also good for workers in the United States. And just as we need to better ensure that trade works for workers in the United States, the same is certainly true and has long been true for workers in Latin America. As I mentioned earlier, growing inequality has become a major problem within my lifetime in the United States. In Latin America, it has a much longer history, of course. So, in concrete terms, what kinds of rules will help achieve these goals for policymakers? In my view, the USMCA is instructive. Most importantly, it includes strong and enforceable commitments to improve the lives of workers in Mexico, stronger provisions than we've seen in any other trade agreement to date. Those commitments will benefit not only Mexican workers, but US workers too, in at least three ways. First, US workers shouldn't be forced to compete against workers who are denied their internationally recognized rights, but that is exactly what happened under NAFTA. Second, if Mexican workers are paid what they are worth, Mexico will be better able to build a thriving middle class. A strong middle class in Mexico will have more money to purchase US exports, putting more Americans to work. Finally, immigration from Latin America has been a controversial issue in the United States. Ensuring that people have good jobs in their home countries will go a long way towards addressing that issue as well. So in my view, the USMCA is a step towards stronger and more equitable economic growth in both Mexico and the United States. It may serve as a new baseline with other Latin American countries too. We have learned over the years that we cannot reasonably expect unregulated trade expansion to automatically benefit everyone. But if we shape the terms of trade, if we are careful in how we write the rules, we can ensure that the benefits of trade are maximized and the costs minimized, and that both benefits and costs are shared broadly and equitably. Thank you again for this important opportunity.
Thank you so much, Jason. Great speech. That's fantastic. Appreciate you sharing your words of wisdom with us. So again, thank you, and we'll pass it back to Marianne.
Great. Thank you, Omar. Great to see you again.
Great to see you. Take care.
Thank you again, Chair Kearns. And now I'm going to pass it back to our chairman, Lincoln Diaz Balart, to make the next introduction. Sir?
Certainly, Marianne. It's my privilege now to introduce someone who I admire deeply, Mauricio Claver Carone. We were, those of us who know Mauricio and know him as the hardest working, really among the most brilliant public servants, certainly that I've ever met. Those of us who know him were very, very happy to see our sister republics from throughout the hemisphere, as well as the United States, vote to elect him as the new president of the Inter-American Development Bank. Because Mauricio Claver Carone is not only that brilliant, hardworking public servant, he's someone who really has manifested throughout his career a profound knowledge of an indispensable fact. And that is that economic prosperity, economic progress depends on the rule of law. And where the rule of law exists, that's where economic prosperity, job creation, and increased wealth for the nations can take place. And so this public servant, Mauricio Claver Carone, who is a Latin Americanist, a student of the republics of this hemisphere, who knows intimately those republics of this hemisphere and their importance, obviously, not only to the United States, but to inter-American law and our regional community, obviously. That Latin Americanist is the new president of the Inter-American Development Bank. So it is my privilege, and on behalf of Chile, my honor to welcome for his remarks, President Mauricio Claver Carone.
Hey, thank you so much, Lincoln, Congressman. And thank you for the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute for inviting me to join you today, albeit virtually. It's really an honor to participate alongside you and some of my really good friends in the Hispanic community, in the development community, in the business community, and the policymaking community on the Hill, and Senator Rick Scott, ITC Chair Jason Kearns, and USAID Administrator John Barsa. Let me go off real quick off some of my prepared remarks in order. I actually came out of a board meeting and need to actually go back into a board meeting in regards to the crisis that's facing Central America right now. Not one hurricane, Eta, but now two hurricanes, Eta and Iota, have hit Central America, particularly hitting hard Honduras, Nicaragua, also Belize, Guatemala, and El Salvador to a degree, and also the archipelago of islands off Colombia have been really hit hard. Two events, and on top of everything that's happening with COVID and everything of the sort, tens of millions of people that are going to be suffering great shortages of food and other their crops have completely been disintegrated with this hurricane, and we're talking about a reconstruction of anywhere between $4 to $5 billion that's gonna take place. We've been working really closely with the World Bank. We've been leading and coordinating the efforts of the World Bank, the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, as well as even the UN and CEPAL, et cetera, to one, have first and foremost a damage assessment, but then also to have a short-term immediate impact on the recovery, and then therefore to have a long-term reconstruction plan. So I take advantage to all my friends in the policymaking community, Senator Scott, John, and also in the business community to really keep an eye out amidst many things going on, but in Central America, which has had actually the worst hurricane season we've seen in the region in 50 years. And now we're talking the same areas hit twice by devastating hurricanes, and people are suffering. Children are going to be needing food, and people are going to be displaced, and it's a horrible incident. And so I appeal to all of your help, and we'll be presenting more things that we're going to be trying to do, as well as with our partners and our borrowing and our shareholders here at the bank, in order to mobilize some immediate funds in addition to what we're doing here from the bank. So anyhow, wanted to give that plug since I have everyone's attention here, and obviously influentials like you. So first and foremost, we all know firsthand, we've seen the economic damage that's been caused by COVID-19 alongside the devastating human toll. And what I'm here to talk about today, though, is really about trade optimism, although of course I came in talking about Central America and the two hurricanes, but my intention really was to talk about the opportunities, the optimism, and the potential to really emerge from this crisis with fundamental upgrades made to commerce across of our hemisphere. Early estimates by the WTO said global trade would contract between 13 and 32% in 2020. And I'm sure we were all heartened to read the revised forecast last month. We put the contraction at around somewhere in 9%. That is, in part due to the growth in global trade of 8% in June and 5% in July. No one doubts that this recovery will be hard won, but the prospects for 2021 are auspicious. The IMF's most recent World Economic Outlook forecasts global trade to increase by 8.3%. Indeed, trade and economic integration offer one of the principal pathways to the economic recovery that our region and the world so desperately need today. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but here's one statistic that removes any doubt. According to IDB research, trade liberalization was responsible for up to 40% of the increase in the per capita GDP of Latin America and the Caribbean between 1990 and 2010. Trade with the United States, of course, is behind much of that figure. Today, Latin America and the Caribbean is among our country's fastest growing regional trading partners. The US accounts for more than 30% of merchandise imports to the region, and it's the destination for nearly 45% of the region's merchandise exports. Fueled by an expanding number of free trade agreements, bilateral trade in merchandise reached almost $900 billion last year. The current US administration has started FTA talks with South America's biggest economy, Brazil, and that was something I was pleased in my previous role to really begin and to move forward. And a deal could really be a major boon to hemispheric commerce. The United States is also a key investor in Latin America and the Caribbean. FDI eclipsed $910 billion last year, behind only Europe and Asia Pacific. And let me pause here for a second. Even though in 2018 to 2019, we saw those numbers decrease in Latin America and the Caribbean by about 35 billion, yet increase in Asia Pacific by about 50 billion. I think after the pandemic, there's a real opportunity to flip that around, and that's what we're working here towards. Those investments, as I said, are also destined for diverse sectors, much more so than China's, frankly. Behind the flow of goods and services are the real people who can drive markets. Bilateral trade and investment links between the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean will only grow stronger if we continue tapping into the deep social and cultural ties that exist. Hispanics make up more than 18% of the overall US population, almost 60 million people, which makes them the largest non-white ethnic group in the country. The United States is also the second largest Spanish-speaking country in the world, and part of my election campaign was showing that integration and my being just as Latin in many ways, in most ways, than previous presidents here, yet being born in Miami and being raised here. After taxes, Hispanic households held more than $800 billion in spending power last year. So what comes next? Despite COVID-19, but in part because of it, frankly, we're now at a moment of potentially immense opportunity for expanding and deepening trade across our hemisphere. What I'm talking about is something we've been talking a lot about lately, and it's almost an obsession of mine, and it's one of my priorities, which is nearshoring. Broadly defined, nearshoring encompasses both investment and the development of new suppliers in a nearer location. Output employment in that location get a boost when, for example, a large firm opens or expands a subsidiary there, or when the firm sources its production from a local supplier. The shortage of critical supplies we've experienced during the pandemic has only encouraged the trend of companies seeking to better secure their supply chains by moving them closer to home. Get this, a study from June by the UBS Evidence Lab found that more than 75% of US companies with factories in Asia have decided, or at least are considering, to relocate part of their operations to other countries. A Gartner study recently this year found that at least a third of 260 leading global companies plan to move part of their chains out of China by 2023. What an opportunity. The time appears to be right for countries of our hemisphere to take advantage of these forces, helping elevate trade ties between the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean to the next level. There are already prominent cases to point to, both in goods and services. Encouraged by lower labor costs in manufacturing, up to 20% lower than in China, and the increasing sophistication and competitiveness of the Mexican automotive sector, Ford has begun relocating some of its production plants. Their plans include an improved facility in Hermosillo, a new one in San Luis Potosí, and a construction of a technology center in the state of Mexico. Teleperformance, a French multinational working in IT and outsourcing services, has opened 27 offices in Colombia in the last few years and plans to hire another 10,000 remote employees. Amazon plans to hire 2,000 more employees in Colombia to better serve the Americas after the company first opened a regional hub in Bogota in 2018. As you know, I no longer work for the US government. My client now is Latin America and the Caribbean. As president of the IDB, I will work to help our 26 borrowing nations reap the rewards of nearshoring and the potential for jobs that can really spur other forms of economic and social development there. But that's good news for the United States. And I can tell you that as an American, for US businesses, for the economy, and the ties between the countries of our hemisphere. I'm also really clear-eyed about what needs to happen for Latin America and the Caribbean to benefit from these experiences. The countries in the region need to make progress on 3 main fronts. Absolutely, all of which need IDB support. 1, they must implement aggressive strategies for attracting FDI and promoting exports. IDB research shows that export promotion programs can lead to export gains of as high as 20%. Our countries must also develop sustainable infrastructure that reduces the time and cost of trade, which can still be lowered. That includes roads, ports, airports, border crossings, and much more. This is really important. A 1% reduction in transportation costs could increase the region's exports by up to 8%. Finally, countries need to take measures to increase intra-regional trade and integration. Doing so requires modernizing the network of free trade agreements and tackling critical issues like rules of origin, regulatory harmonization, and digital trade. The IDB will play a seminal role in years to come by providing and leveraging financial resources, sharing technical assistance, and coordinating regional initiatives with, as the honest brokers, frankly, that we are. Everyone here today from both the public and private sector has a role to play in seeing these opportunities come to fruition for the benefit not only of our bottom lines, but for the people that we serve. Thank you for this opportunity, and it's really a pleasure to be with all of you today.
Thank you again to President Mauricio Claver Carone. And now we will continue the program with Omar Franco.
Hi, everyone. A great presentation by Mauricio. That was fantastic. So I am here. I think I see Barsa. John Barsa is on. So let me quickly introduce him. And we're going to do it like Cuban style. This is going to be like a sobremesa. We're just a charla between us just to kind of see what he's doing over at USAID. So John Barsa is currently the acting USAID Deputy Administrator or Administrator. He was sworn in on June 10th, 2019. That was a good date for me since that's when my twins were born. So as the Assistant Administrator for the USAID's the Bureau of Latin America and the Caribbean. John Barsa comes to USAID from the Department of Homeland Security, where he led the DHS Office of Partnership and Engagement as Acting Assistant Secretary and later as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary. His leadership was also critical in the successful efforts in combating the scourge of human trafficking. John began his career at DHS in the Trump administration as a special assistant to Secretary John Kelly, a position he took after serving on the President Trump's DHS landing team. During the historic 2017 hurricane season, he deployed to South Florida to assist with Hurricane Irma preparation and response. Later, after Hurricane Maria, he went to Puerto Rico and designed and led one of the most complex and challenging intergovernmental affairs efforts in FEMA history. John entered public service first as a member of the U.S. Army Reserves, initially with the 11th Special Forces Group and later with the 450th Civil Affairs Battalion. While still in the reserves, he started working for our own Congressman Lincoln Diaz Balart on defense and national security issues, including support for democracy and human rights in Cuba, Nicaragua, and all of the Western Hemisphere. John's work also included working in the Bush administration as a lead senior level coordinator over at NASA. And when the Department of Homeland Security was created, he created and led the Office of Public Liaison, where he handled all the outreach for Secretaries Tom Ridge and Michael Chertoff. In the private sector, he's held positions with premier defense trade associations, small businesses, and large businesses, including a leading Fortune 100 company. The son of a Cuban refugee, Mr. Barsa grew up in a fully bilingual and bicultural family in Miami. He has a bachelor's degree in international affairs from FIU. And he did go to that other high school that we don't talk about, yeah, but we won't mention that. So John, thank you so much for joining us. So I know you have a lot to say, so we just wanted to kind of get the ball rolling and ask you what's going on, what are you seeing, especially in the Western Hemisphere?
Well, Omar, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction. Now, I mean, my gosh, I can see why my LinkedIn profile is so dizzying. Okay, yeah, so a lot of time in and out of public service. So most recently, I was confirmed by the Senate to lead the Latin American and Caribbean Bureau of USAID, and then I was asked by the president to lead USAID. The title kind of changed, but I'm still leading USAID, but it's rather dizzying. So, but one of the benefits I have coming into the position at USAID is working with great leaders like my former boss, Congressman Lincoln Diaz Balart, and so many others who have really informed me coming into this role. So it is the honor of a lifetime to be leading USAID, certainly in this challenging time as well. Having just come to the USAID front office from the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, it gives me a really complete and enhanced perspective on the challenges we're facing in the Western Hemisphere and some of the opportunities. Because sitting here in the front office, I see a lot of the best practices that we do in other parts of the world, and we start thinking, well, how do we replicate this here in our own backyard? So I guess the first question many people might have in the audience: what does USAID do to support trade and commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean? Well, USAID does a lot of things. So Mauricio was right to mention the importance of the hurricane right now. So all of us are certainly focusing on what's happening right there. USAID, we have humanitarian response elements. So we do a lot of life-saving work right now. Yesterday, I was able to announce an additional $17 million in humanitarian assistance. So USAID has a development side and a humanitarian disaster response side. And both of these elements come in play, they work together. So in the Western Hemisphere, for example, with the terrible case of the Venezuelan diaspora, it is a humanitarian challenge, trying to keep people alive, healthy and fed. And it is also a development challenge, how do you get people jobs? So if you take, more announcements coming up on the hurricanes in Central America. It's very much on my mind. It's been kind of consuming me for the last week. What does USAID do directly to help trade? Well, one of the things we do is we work to enable the conditions for trade to take place. We actually do change conditions on the ground to make conditions favorable for the private sector to grow and take root. We help with education. So a lot of our economic development work, we work in countries throughout the world in terms of any number of things which allow countries to stand up on their own. What we at USAID do, we have our mantra, we help countries on their journey to self-reliance. Right. And really, what a wonderful motto that is. We help countries become economically resilient to be able to stand alone. So this takes place in working with universities, trade schools. So things that people might not necessarily think of immediately as economic development that leads to trade actually are. For an example, in Colombia, after 5 decades of civil strife and conflict, there are some problems with land titling. So we worked with the Duque administration. We have some cutting edge programs to allow people to gain title to land.
Right.
How does that in fact trade? Well, it affects trades a lot of ways. Because what you find when individuals have a title to land, they actually own a piece of land, certainly recidivism and coca growing, I mean, that almost goes out the window. Then people can invest and say, you know what, I'm going to grow coffee, or I'm going to grow chocolate. And then not only is that for business within Colombia, but it turns into an export as well.
Yeah,
so
they can use it as collateral, right, to build up their small business. Yeah, Hernando de Soto had a great book on that, on capitalism, the Peruvian, which I've read numerous times. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, so for a while there, because of a change in government, we had to shut down our mission in El Salvador. But one of the success stories we had, no, sorry, in Ecuador. I misspoke. So we're reestablishing our mission in Ecuador. One of the success stories we had was helping these small farmers come together to combine their assets in growing chocolate. And now they have this high-end exotic chocolate, which is all the rage in Europe, which leads to economic development. So it's trade, it's a win-win. And USAID does some really great work. Really proud of the work we do in the Western Hemisphere as well.
So John, how has COVID-19 impacted all this? I mean, what's going on with that? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Oh, totally. From the onset of the pandemic, I knew intuitively that this is more than a healthcare crisis. I mean, we saw it here in the United States as well. This is going to lead to economic contraction. So one of the first things I did when everything started going with the pandemic, I tried to get my staff to lift their eyes from the crises of the inbox in the moment to think about the second and third order effects. Because I knew intuitively there's going to be economic contraction. So how's that economic contraction throughout the world going to play out? Is it going to hit the world evenly? What are the second and third order impacts of the pandemic going to be? And specifically in the Western Hemisphere. So I started something called the Over the Horizon Task Force. So this Over the Horizon Task Force did a complete study over 70 interviews, 400 data sources in terms of looking how things are going to be playing out in the future. We're already seeing things play out in Latin America in very disturbing ways. So one of the things that the IMF just released, they released an estimate of economic contraction of 8% in the region. That is a really high number. So take a step back. I mean, that affects everything in terms of people's livelihood. It threatens all of the development work we've been doing in the region. One of the things I like saying is that the majority of victims of the pandemic will have never caught the virus.
Right.
Because the virus.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, the health aspects. I mean, you can't deny. I mean, it's absolutely terrible. 11 million confirmed cases in the region, over 400,000 related deaths. But it's the other victims as well from the economic contraction. One of the things particularly systemic in Latin America is the informal economy. Right. So what we notice with the economic contraction, the informal economy are the ones who get hit the hardest. And this also affects women more than men in Latin America, because by percentage wise, more women are members in the informal economy as well. So what does this mean to USAID? So what we're doing right now is we're re-looking at the way we do our programming in the countries. We cannot put blinders on and think of the COVID altered world having the same challenges and opportunities as the pre-COVID world. So we're cognizant of how this has changed, and we're doubling down in certain areas like women's economic empowerment. We're doubling down on any number of challenges that COVID is bringing about to the region. You're mute. Can't hear you.
What exactly is USAID? And I know Chair Kearns mentioned it, on the immigration, he clearly stated that one of the things that we can do as a country is help those countries prop themselves up, right? The immigration, crisis could resolve itself if we just go out there and help those countries, stand on their own, right? So what are some of the things? I know we talked a little earlier, and I think that's a great topic to discuss on the heels of his comments.
No, I mean, so again, Omar, you and I, so many of the people participating in this conference, we are either the children of people who had to flee their countries, or we fled from the countries ourselves. And certainly somebody who's not born into this world saying, hey, I'm going to pick up and leave. It's obviously, there are push-pull factors in migration. So certainly with you and I mean, it was, communism, what it was doing to our families, and they had to leave. So USAID really is a wonderful place to work. So where else can people get paid to help the betterment of the human condition throughout the world. I mean, it's a really incredible mission. So if you look at what we've been doing, throughout Latin America and the world, again, helping countries on their journey to self-reliance. We are trying to create the economic conditions and safety conditions so people don't feel like they have to leave.
Right.
So when we're working on civil society organizations, USAID actively tries to spread the seeds of democracy in places where it's not welcome sometimes. So we have civil society programming in Cuba. We work with Juan Guaido in the National Assembly to get democracy in Venezuela again. Because we're looking to build these stable societies. And on the economic development front, we would love to be in a place where there's enough economic development, there's enough opportunities for jobs. I mean, we all want the best for our children. So we would love to. We're working to be in a place where the parents of every child in Central and Latin America and the Caribbean doesn't have to worry about their own children having a career path, the ability to take care of their own families. So the kind of things we do on economic development, how to ensure that the private sector grows, doing leverage investments, working with Adam Bowler and the DFC, working with Mauricio and the IDB. If there's any sliver of doubt in anybody's mind that Mauricio is the right guy for the job, let me take a step back to one of the things he did when he was in the White House. He was one of the prime architects of something called America Crece. So America Crece is this whole of government approach, USAID, the Development Finance Corporation, Department of Commerce, to basically counter, what China's doing with the Belt and Road Initiative. I mean,
So in terms of dollars, I mean, what are we looking at? What specifically? I mean, how does that flow? I mean, is it just dollars to other governments? Is it just economic development? Are you giving to civil society groups? Is it a hybrid of all those things?
Okay, so the vast majority of USAID investments do not go to governments at all. I mean, we're almost like 98%. We do not, as a rule, hand money to governments. We work with local organizations. So we'll work with NGOs on the ground. We'll work with the private sector on the ground. So we work to catalyze our investments and leverage dollars with the private sector. Some of the things that we do is we back loans. We do loan guarantees. So $1 of investment by USAID can lead to $20 of a loan to actually get something done. So our work with our financial partners, again, IDB, DFC, international organizations, and organizations on the ground. So USAID doesn't work with other governments. We work with organizations on the ground. And we always, so Mauricio was talking about, nearshoring with investments, trying to get companies to go here. We always, buy local, invest local. And again, the contrast with China can't be clear. So one of the benefits of sitting in the position of not just leading the Latin American Caribbean Bureau, but of all at USAID, I get a really good view of what China's doing around the world. And it gives context to what they're trying to do in Latin America. I was in Kenya last month. So I'm flying over what is the most expensive railroad in the history of the planet. It was built by China, and the Chinese made all these promises to the Kenyans. Oh, we'll use your local labor. It's going to benefit you. Forget it. The cost per mile, first of all, went through the roof. They brought in their own labor from China, their own products. Instead of buying local within Kenya or within Africa, they were paying more for parts and supplies coming in from China because it benefits. It's not even debt diplomacy. Yes, they do debt diplomacy all over the world. So one of the things we do with our missions throughout Latin America and the Caribbean is we tell these host governments, oye, cuidado, what they're promising you a bag of goods. They did the same thing to this other country. Don't fall into this trap.
So what would you say? I mean, so China is a problem, right? I mean, across the hemisphere specifically. I mean, are they, debt diplomacy? I know you mentioned that, but what else? And this will be our last question. I know we're running out of time, and you obviously have a lot of things, but I just wanted to ask that because I know a lot of people are looking at that, as we move forward. Like, what's China doing down there?
So China's game is a global game. I'll tell you right now. But it is stunning how active and aggressive they are being in the Western Hemisphere. in terms of building ports, infrastructure. So what they use the same playbook all over the world, which is why it's kind of easier for us to capture horror stories from other parts of the world, and through our missions on the ground, share with ambassadors in other countries to try to wave people off and to say, hey, I know they're singing sweet nothings in your ear, but it doesn't really work out that way. So yes, part of it is debt diplomacy. They're using every tool they can, because at the end of the day, the Chinese Communist Party is doing everything it can to stay in power.
Right.
So
It's
part of that,
perpetuating the one-party system.
exactly. Well, so again, so you and I, others who fled Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua, we know, for everybody who hasn't seen the movie, communism doesn't work.
Right.
So what's part of the things they're doing is they're trying to prop up their own economy by getting favorable markets for their goods, and again, trying to get their labor employed. So the U.S. position of journey to self-reliance, really, what a wonderful agency, what a great country we live in, where it is in the United States strategic national interest to have other countries being free, independent, and economically viable. Oh my God, wonderful. Whereas the Chinese, they just want to keep other countries subservient, feeding them, and basically being just satellite, just abuse. So if this was a cowboy movie, we would be wearing the white hats without any doubt in my mind. And
it's when Senator Rubio talks about American exceptionalism. That's where it is. I mean, we have to be the leaders in that space because nobody else will. Well, I see Marianne, so I think our time has come to an end here. But John, thank you so much for joining us. We'd actually love to have you back at some point and do this for a little bit longer stretch of time. I feel like we could have stayed here for another half hour talking, but again, John, very good friend of ours, good friend of mine. Thank you for all you do and all the public service you've done through the years. You are exactly, when I think of a public servant, you are exactly the person I think about.
Well, thank you, Omar. Thank you for everything you do. And thanks to Lincoln and all the leaders in Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute. You guys are changing the world. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, sir, for being with us. And as Mario said, we'd love to have you back for another deeper dive discussion. But as you mentioned earlier, our hearts and minds are with the people in our neighboring countries in the Caribbean and hope they are doing well. Please let us know how we can help out as well. Gracias.
A ti.
And now to get into a different discussion with industry leaders and different perspectives, I'm going to start by introducing Molly Hooper, who will serve as the moderator. Reminder that if you have any questions, to please put your questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. It'll be a lot easier when we get to that segment. And I'll come back in and help Molly as I can, because sometimes we still get some people going back and forth, so we can be helpful. And as you put in your questions in for the discussion, please make sure, if you can, to please identify the person that you have the question for, because that always helps us as well. So officially here, Molly Hooper is the host, creator, and producer of the podcast called Article 1. Hooper started in Washington, D.C. as a teenage page in the House of Representatives. She has covered Congress as a reporter for Fox News Channel, Congressional Quarterly, and The Hill. And she is currently a political contributor for CBS News. Molly has also helped us as a moderator with her perspectives, points of view, and great questions at other CHLI programming. So thank you again. Molly, the floor is yours, dear.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for having me moderate this panelist portion of this symposium on global trade. We definitely have a diverse group of experts from key industries, tech, agriculture, retail and manufacturing, and energy. From tech, we have Mario Palacios, who serves as the company's Senior Managing Director for International Trade Policy. Intel is the world's largest producer of semiconductors and also manufactures computer networking and communication products. Mario is in charge of Intel's policy and advocacy. We're talking legislative, regulatory, and administrative in all areas that are related to international trade, worldwide export controls, customs, and trade facilitation. From agriculture, we have Karis Gutter, who leads Corteva Agrisciences Government and Industry Affairs efforts. Corteva is a publicly traded global global agriculture company that provides farmers around the world with premium agricultural solutions, seeds, crop production products, and software and tools and services. Corteva also provides agronomic support and services to help increase farmer productivity and profitability. Before joining Corteva, Gutter served in many roles at the USDA, including Deputy Undersecretary for Foreign Agriculture Services. And before that, this is sort of my neck of the woods, Karis also spent several years on Capitol Hill as Deputy Chief of Staff and Legislative Director to a very important congressman, Benny Thompson, who is the chairman of the Homeland Services Committee. From manufacturing and retail, we have Laura Segrist, who is the Director of Federal Government Affairs in Walmart's Washington, D.C. office. She is responsible for the company's advocacy strategy before the federal government on manufacturing, consumer product safety, and small business issues, in addition to serving as the liaison with key congressional leadership offices. Her career began on Capitol Hill, where she spent more than 7 years as a legislative aide, and she's also spent time working at the National Association of Manufacturers, as well as Whirlpool Corporation with their government affairs teams. Also from manufacturing, we have Kip Eidberg, who is the Senior Vice President of Government and Industry Relations at the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, AEM. As head of the DC office, Kip guides strategy for AEM's government relations, public affairs, grassroots advocacy, and policy efforts. He works with member companies and allied organizations, and under his leadership, AEM's government and public affairs team has advanced pro-manufacturing policies on behalf of more than 1,000 member companies. And finally, from energy, we have Jeffrey Wilson, who is the Director of Government and Public Affairs at WPX Energy. Jeffrey oversees the company's outreach to the full spectrum of the company's external stakeholders, and apart from his deep experience in the upstream oil and gas industry, he has extensive experience in campaign work, coalition building, and public service, working in the Senate. Again, my bailiwick. And he holds both his BA and MA from the University of Oklahoma, very important state for energy production. Now let's get to the questions, and I'm going to start off with Mario. Mario, we're looking forward to this whole new political landscape, divided government. I'm wondering, what do you think will be some of the biggest international trade policy challenges and opportunities in the days ahead?
That's a really good question, and wow, I mean, I think we can spend like 3 hours or 3 days talking about that. I'd like first to thank CHLI for this opportunity, and great to have the community around the table talking about these things. And I'm originally from Nicaragua, so I'm focusing a lot on what's happening right now in the region. So I echo what we've talked about in terms of heart and mind, thinking about our friends and family in the region. We are absolutely entering a new era. I mean, if we haven't already done so, we will soon be. Geopolitical tensions aside, the pandemic has shown us that the world can be flipped on its head very, very quickly. So in terms of challenges, I think we have to think about multilateralism again. I think the gentleman from USAID touched upon that, the need for the United States to lead in many of these multilateral systems, because if we don't, others will. And when others do, well, we should be very careful about what worldview they're bringing to the table. It may not necessarily be aligned to our view. But we also have to think about what the economic prosperity is going to look like. I think we have to think about how we can get technology, how can we get product, how can we start raising up some of these communities that have suffered more than others across the pandemic. I think one thing from our perspective is what the pandemic showed us, at least, is the need for some level of cooperation among governments. We saw a lot of a need for government cooperation, but also coordination, because supply chains link us. And these supply chains link us at various levels, whether it's PPE for our frontline workers. My wife's a nurse, so we were hit. You know, we had family and friends there on the front lines. It's important to serve that community, but it's also to think about also how we treat the pandemic. There's a lot of ICT devices that are used in the treatment of folks suffering from COVID, and getting those goods in and out of countries is critical. And just how important, you know, the supply chain is. So as we look forward, I think, from just keeping my remarks short, multilateralism, cooperation, and U.S. leadership, I think, are opportunities for us, I think, in the years ahead.
Well, that's a very interesting answer, and maybe let me just transition a bit to Karis. Karis, how do you anticipate, you know, a divided government will deal with one big Goliath in the trade business, China, and China's trade practices moving forward?
So one of the challenges that we've been, let me back up. First, I'd like to thank the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute for inviting us all to participate in this panel. I'd also like to bring you greetings on behalf of Corteva AgriScience and my Senior Vice President, Ann Alonzo, who's no stranger to media. We've been impacted and confronted by the coronavirus pandemic for quite some time now. And we know all too well the type of supply and value chain disruptions that domino from a lack of preparedness. So for Corteva AgriScience and the agriculture value chain, one of the biggest challenges to food and agriculture is a disruption in movement. Since the majority of food and agriculture is largely tied to consumption and perishables. So the more resilient markets are, the better and the greater the opportunities for success, and the greater opportunities we have for new market access, the better off we are. So one of the things that we're going to have to do is to enforce as well as implement free trade agreements. Chief among those are the US-Mexico-Canada agreement and the China phase 1. So to your question about China, some of the things that we're going to have to do is enforce those trade agreements that are in place, and those purchase agreements to buy commodities, as well as the biotechnology and the intellectual property provisions that are embedded in those trade agreements. Because during a time of crises, those provisions are invaluable.
Right. Well, Laura, let me move to you, because, you know, Walmart is not usually the first company that you think of when you're thinking of U.S. manufacturing. We think more of the retail side, but I know that you were hoping to tell us a bit about Walmart's commitments to U.S. jobs and to the manufacturing sector. What has Walmart been working on, and how has COVID challenged your space in particular, your work in this space?
Yeah, thanks, Molly. And before I answer, I also, like everyone else, want to thank Marianne and CHLI us all to join the panel today. And I know most people know Walmart or grew up going to the local store in their hometown. You know, just a few kind of high-level points about our company. A lot of people forget Walmart started really small with one discount store and the idea of selling more for less. The company has grown over the last 50 years into literally the largest retailer in the world. And nearly 265 million customers and members visit our over 11,000 stores and e-commerce websites. In the US alone, we employ nearly 1.5 million people. And of our US-based associates, I know I'm proud to be able to highlight that over 55% are women, 44% are people of color, including over 220,000 Hispanic and Latino associates. But back to your original point, you're right. Walmart, I'll try to keep this short, even though it's not in my nature. Walmart and manufacturing, or even Walmart and small business, aren't completely synonymous in the minds of most people I meet. And many people are surprised to find out that in our stores in the US, over 2/3 of the products we sell are made, sourced, or grown right here in America. We've had an intentional goal of sourcing an additional $250 billion in product over the last 10 years that we kicked off actually back in 2013. So this isn't new to us. World's largest retailer, we play a unique role in facilitating the progress for current and new suppliers. We're really uniquely positioned to accelerate efforts that have been working hard over the last several years to increase our purchase of US manufactured goods. So one way a lot of people aren't familiar with that we continue to grow our US source products is through an annual event we typically host in Bentonville, Arkansas, which for those who are aware, where we're globally headquartered. It's called Open Call. An open call is an opportunity for small businesses and entrepreneurs to meet directly with Walmart buyers and hear from experts within our company. As we're all very aware, adapting to the new normal during COVID and finding innovative ways to succeed is a way of life these days. And Open Call 2020 was no different. We quickly transitioned from a physical event to what we're all used to now, is virtual. Over 4,800 entrepreneurs from across the country, 49 states, DC, Puerto Rico, Canada, among others, applied to pitch their new and innovative source products. We saw a 44% increase this year in applicants, and all 4,800 were immediately invited to sell on Walmart.com, a site all frequent. Some of those stories even more amazing is that a lot of these businesses literally never had before now. So some of my favorite products, if you'll indulge me, were a hose nozzle. I know I do a lot of yard work. Made by disabled vets in California, pet bandanas made in Minnesota, homemade applesauce from a gentleman in Ohio who started making his grandfather's recipe when he was just 15 years old. So I know my 2-year-old can't wait to get her hands on that. But our platform provides small businesses via Open Call, a real way to change the trajectory of their business. And given the immense impacts that COVID has had on small business, unlocking that online option is critical now more than ever. Beyond Open Call, though, and circling back to the year we've all collectively been experiencing, COVID has provided our own business with a lot of challenges. We are an essential business. Our stores and DC's distribution centers have remained open during the entire pandemic. And when COVID arrived, our suppliers reacted. Diaper factories started making masks, whiskey distilleries, disinfectants. And because these companies who were already our suppliers or who are US manufacturers were making these products, we were able to get them to Americans in need and fast. This ingenuity and benefit to being in local communities is another reason why we're committed. So just looking ahead, we all need to make sure that small businesses, minority communities, lower income communities are really taken care of. I know this has already even been said on this panel, but the recovery needs to be inclusive and being open. The entire pandemic, we've really learned a lot of lessons, and especially about the American consumer. But I'll stop there and hopefully we can get to the consumers.
Well, let me ask you, Kip. In particular, since COVID hit, one thing that we kept hearing up on Capitol Hill was we need more manufacturing in the U.S. We need to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., back to countries that are more, in line with U.S. values, so to speak. What steps moving forward should Congress and the next administration take to strengthen and incentivize U.S. manufacturing? What do you think, Kip?
Well, that's a great question, Molly. And of course, my thanks as well to Marianne and the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute for having me here today. But, to your question, first and foremost, Congress and the next administration should make a significant investment in America's infrastructure. We as a country are facing up to $2 trillion infrastructure funding gap, while the manufacturing sector faces a workforce crisis with more than 500,000 manufacturing jobs unfilled. And wow. A robust and long-term investment, and we've been saying this for some time, Molly, a robust and long-term investment in infrastructure means what? Jobs, jobs, and more jobs. And it's not only key to the economic recovery, but it's key to the future strength and viability of American manufacturing. So that's the first part. Second part, they need to stay clear of policies that hurt the competitiveness of U.S. manufacturing. For example, any effort to increase the corporate tax rate or repeal some of those pro-growth provisions in tax reform would make equipment manufacturers and businesses in general less competitive, which would mean less investment and fewer jobs. And the use of tariffs and quotas to advance policy objectives is not just misguided, but it is downright criminal and only leads to what? Well, protracted trade wars, which only end up hurting American businesses and American workers. And then third, we need smart and a streamlined approach, if you will, to regulation that yes, protects American workers and our environment on the one hand, but also promotes innovation, economic growth, and job creation. I mean, that is the key to the future of manufacturing. But if I can make one final point, Molly, and some of my colleagues here on the panel have touched on this, but it is a point that is far too often overlooked. We do not have a closed economy in this country. And anyone who suggests that everything should be made in America is effectively advocating for a closed economy. Now, let me tell you what a closed economy will mean for the American worker. It will mean fewer jobs, not more. For our industry to grow, for equipment manufacturers, and 30% of all equipment made in the US is destined for export, by the way. For our industry to grow, we need to have more customers, outside of this country. And in order to have those customers outside of this country, we need to be globally competitive. Now, policies aimed at forcing equipment manufacturers and other manufacturers to make everything in America are nothing more than a Chinese jobs program, because I can tell you everyone in the world will buy their goods from them. And I'll get off my soapbox now, Molly.
Well, it is a soapbox, and it's something that people have been talking about. How do you come up with these policies that sort of balance both sides of the equation? But one thing that you did bring up, and maybe Jeffrey, you can help us with this: environment, energy. I'm wondering, Jeffrey, if you can talk about some of the fundamental challenges that have arisen across the energy sector and industry during these, with these economy-wide impacts from the COVID-19 on things like domestic and international travel, stay-at-home orders, etc. How has that impacted the energy industry? Are you with us, Jeffrey? Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to let if Jeffrey's here, he's here. If he's not, he's not. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on, but I am going to sort of bounce off that question about,
Yeah, I think Jeffrey, are you muted, dear? Okay, all right.
Oh, the dreaded mute. The dreaded mute. Gosh, if you want to see some muted buttons, watch congressional remote hearings. I mean, boy. But on that point about balancing the domestic and the international, trade policies, I'm wondering, Mario, Congress has sought to introduce new policy and regulatory mechanisms into the U.S. national security policy formulations. So we have the export controls, sanctions. Can you talk a little bit about those actions and the challenges that the 117th Congress may have in balancing national security goals with the current realities impacting U.S. firms in global markets, much like Kip was discussing?
Yeah, I think the item Kip brought up on competitiveness, I think is important. Semiconductor industry, for example, globally, it's global competition. Semiconductor manufacturers. We have some of the leaders here in the U.S., but there are many competitors globally as well, some foreign, right? So, the big challenge is national security and economic security. It's striking the balance. I think ultimately we have to make sure that any national security-based policy and export controls have been written for decades, right? And they were written for non-proliferation rule, a world trying to ensure that dual-use goods don't get in the hands of Cold War players, right? Soviet Union, Eastern Bloc, right? So, well, that whole paradigm's shifted. That's when was the last time we talked about the Cold Warsaw Pact countries in the same context? I mean, since the early 90s, maybe, right? 1992. So I think we have to look at that paradigm again. We have to look at those rules again. We have to update those rules to meet our ecosystem realities today. Many companies around the world design, develop, and manufacture a semiconductor, for example. The technology, the know-how exists all over the world. Where do we have a comparative advantage here in the U.S.? We have to do that careful study. I think the Export Control Reform Act of 2018 tried to do that. I think there's still provisions that the Commerce Department is working through. I think those efforts have to go forward. I think Congress should also think about funding staffing of these very critical offices, right? We need the right people to be doing the study, right? I mean, I think those offices aren't staffed. And also look at the ecosystem. Where is this technology available outside the United States? Because one thing is to impose a control, but imposing a stuff that is available outside of the United States, well, that's not very effective. Study is important. Understanding who else is doing it is important, and finding those gaps, those slices, to impose controls, comparative, controls that provide us genuinely a comparative advantage and actually meet the national security objectives of the rules. I think that's something Congress can inject into the dialogue, a level of discipline, of thoughtful engagement, of analysis, in order to do things right and to ensure that we do not lose our competitive edge.
Right. Well, Karis, maybe you can jump in here. How important is foreign direct investment? How important has that been for the U.S. equipment manufacturing industry?
So maybe Kip, the equipment manufacturers.
Or Karis.
Karis. Either or and.
Karis, you want to go first and then I'll jump in?
How about you tee it up and I can close it up?
Hey, that works for me too. And look, it's a great question, Molly, because so much ink, right, has been spilled, so to speak, to write about the trade wars and the tariffs, and so much of the debate up on Capitol Hill has been about the trade war and the tariffs. But I think one issue that is often overlooked is foreign direct investment and the importance of it. And I can tell you that it is absolutely critical, not only to the U.S. manufacturing sector, but to the equipment manufacturing industry, which, by the way, is about 12% of the total manufacturing sector in this country. Foreign direct investment, just to throw some numbers at you, accounts for about $1.8 trillion a year in U.S. manufacturing and about $100 billion in equipment manufacturing. But numbers only tell part of the story, right? And I can tell you that up until the COVID-19 pandemic, I spent a lot of my time traveling around the country and visiting many of our member companies. And I can tell you, I've seen firsthand how previously economically depressed communities, whether in the Midwest, the Southeast, the Pacific Northwest, have been revitalized through the investments made by, in our case, foreign equipment manufacturers. They've hired American workers, they've revitalized main streets, they've invested in communities. And the jobs that they've created have a positive knock-on effect on the overall economy of these communities. And I think that's an important part that is also often overlooked when you talk about foreign direct investments. A lot of the rhetoric is about foreign companies coming in and buying up American companies and then shipping jobs overseas. That couldn't be further from the truth. They're creating jobs here. And the domestic value added multiplier for manufacturing, in our case, Molly, is 3.6, meaning that for every dollar invested in manufacturing in this country, you have $3.60 that is created for the overall economy. And so what we need is we need the next Congress and the next president to make sure that they do not pursue any policies that inadvertently limit or restrict foreign direct investment in U.S. manufacturing, because it has been a lifeline for many communities across this country, particularly now when they still struggle to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the economic crisis that it's brought about.
Okay, I have a better question for you, Karis. Speaking of the global community, what we've come to learn during this COVID crisis is that the global community, it's just how precarious the supply chain is for so many. And how can we leverage our many trade deals throughout the Americas to mitigate risk and make supply chains more secure?
Yep. So one of the things that we've been challenged with, this kind of ladders to the first question and my previous response. The resiliency of the supply is incredibly important. We recognize that when the movement of products slows down or stops, it impacts commerce. So when you have markets shut off due to a pandemic, it can really stymie communities. And so one of the things that we have to do best we can is to keep markets open, but also leverage trade agreements around the globe to continue to be aggressive in opening up new markets. And to kind of ladder to the point that Kip was making a few minutes ago here, we rely on a healthy supply chain, including equipment and manufacturers. Our farm and ranch customers invest quite a bit in their infrastructure, in their equipment. And so ensuring that the financial health and well-being of the equipment manufacturing in that sector, it's important to our farmers, and it's also important for companies like Corteva Agriscience.
Okay, well, Laura, let me ask you a question. What have been some of the challenges for Walmart in your reshoring efforts? What areas do policymakers need to tackle to continue the success that Walmart already has had and others across the industry have made?
Yeah,
what more do you have to do?
Yeah, and to build off maybe what Kip was mentioning, literally there are, I think, a lot of statistics out there that prove for every worker that we hire in manufacturing, there are 5 employees are hired elsewhere down the supply chain. When we launched our 2013 commitment, it was estimated we were going to help create 1 million new jobs. And the way we position this with policymakers at all levels of government is it can't just be a federal solution or state solution or local solution. It needs to be holistic. If you look at success stories of reshoring, we have a great success story of a bike manufacturer in South Carolina. It was an all hands on deck, Walmart, state officials, federal officials, really working with the company to see what they need. And the one thing lawmakers can't ever wrap their heads around, even when I was up there, it was hard for me to do this. Businesses and specifically manufacturers don't plan in 2 or 6 year increments like the political calendars. So we really need to get policymakers to come together in a bipartisan way to look at it holistically. And, just specific to manufacturing and some of the things we've identified, are looking at the financial burden that's placed on private industry and how hard it is for us in the training and upskilling or reskilling of workers. Public-private partnerships, everyone loves to talk about that. It's really hard to start those, especially in the manufacturing space, and create these clusters of manufacturing zones that used to exist and be robust in this country, and that our competitors have really learned from us and taken over this tier really much anymore. And then, like everyone's been harping on trade, it's all about trade and American competitiveness. So, but I think just looking at it in the lane of I'm a federal official, I just am going to work on my federal policies. If they really want to have a made in USA agenda, it really needs to be holistic.
Well, and this is a question that can kind of go to everybody, but let me start with you, Mario. COVID-19 has really changed the way that we work, we go to school. I mean, the way that we interact with our families and friends. Can you talk a little bit about how business has changed for y'all, and will continue to do so because of COVID-19? This is not going away anytime soon. Remote working, it feels like is people are taking advantage of it, and it's here to stay for a little while at least. What can governments do to help industry and society really cope with these type of global crises? And essentially, what have you learned? Mario, why don't we start with you?
Gosh, it seems like March 13th seems like forever ago, right? But that's the last day I think I was in the office, right, in person. So since that second week of March, I think people are working harder now. I think people are having to deal with this remote environment. I think having the first let me turn it around. I think companies have to really think about their workforce and provide opportunities for their workforce to take time off, be more flexible with a schedule. And I think many companies have been starting to do that. And certainly, having peripherals, whether it's a monitor, a headset, to ensure productivity, right? And I think that's beginning at the micro level. Then moving up, I mean, it's really starting with.
Incidentally, doesn't Intel Corp make some of those products?
No. I mean, we certainly make the products, but we don't make a semiconductor to go in your tool. But I know you're just teasing. You're just poking me a little bit, so that's okay. But ultimately, it comes down to it's the funding of those programs. People talked about tax reform. People talked about relief packages, but it's everyone. It's there's tariffs on certain types of products at the moment. There was a relief kind of effort, or at least maybe some analysis around, do tariffs add to the cost of some devices that are needed for people to work remotely? I think that's a careful study. Ultimately, though, if I'm focusing on trade, it's ensuring that trade agreements and we're being compliant to those trade agreements, that governments coordinate on the movement of goods that are deemed essential in the pandemic, and certainly for the pandemic response. I think that's also very important. And also dialogue, right? I mean, many governments in the early phases started putting trade restrictions or controls around certain types of PPE. But why was that done? Is there a security element to it, or was there something else going on? And I think that's where dialogue comes in and coordination comes in, because if one government determines one sector to be essential, then why not other governments doing the same thing? And sharing that information, I think, is also important. What it's taught us is we need to be resilient. We also need to be very cognizant of what others are going through, not just ourselves, but also as companies, whether it's Intel working with its vendors. How can Intel help a vendor in another country get the right information? We were having to do a lot of work in those early stages of just making sure our vendors or the people that they work with have the information, have a letter from DHS on what's critical infrastructure or essential, what is some guidance that maybe an Asian government is giving to its semiconductor industry. We did a lot of that, and it was just information sharing to help others along the supply chain.
And Carlos, what about you? What about in the farming industry and agriculture? What changes have you noticed, and what can government do to help in those industries?
So some of the things that we're most concerned about is ensuring that the most critical need PPE types of equipment aren't depleted, that are used in the chemical makeup of some of our products. And so we've been very flexible, working hand to hand with governments to ensure that things like sanitizers and things of that sort are where they're needed most. But a lot of those inputs do go into agriculture. And so we're taking a long, hard look at our supply chain and how resilient it is and what the impacts are and are going to be. We're also looking at currency challenges around the globe, where from one nation to the next, the coronavirus pandemic has had a unique impact. And so we're looking at what that could mean for us as a company and for our business. And then there's how we stage and move products and goods around the globe, being more nimble, ensuring that our workforce has the resources that they need to be effective, while at the same time delivering on behalf of customers. We're excited and proud to say that in spite of all the pandemic, we haven't missed one shipment. So as an essential part of the food value chain, it's shown how strong we can be around the globe, but it's also exposed some challenges. Where the government can be helpful is taking a stronger role in ensuring that the essential groups have the resources that they need and have the guidance that they need when they need it most. So for example, at the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, there were questions around what is an essential group of employees and things like that. So now that we've been through it, many of those questions have now been answered and we know how to deal with them. But ensuring that if and when this kind of issue ever occurs again, or if the pandemic persists, we will need to be right back here at the drawing board to ensure that for the next growing seasons, for the next cycles, we're prepared to be more resilient going forward.
And what about you, Kip? What do you think?
Well, Molly, one thing I've learned is that I'm not a very good second grade math teacher, but that's not what you're asking. I'd like to echo my friend Karis's point about supply chains. I think for our industry, for equipment manufacturers, we've done several surveys throughout this year of CEOs, executives of leading small, medium, and large equipment manufacturers, and they told us right off the bat in April that supply chains, particularly global supply chains, was the biggest concern. And we've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. Supply chains are incredibly complex. They take years to establish, and I think COVID-19 has proven that they are maybe a little bit more fragile than we had initially thought. So. Supply chains and getting those parts and components to equipment manufacturing companies across the country was initially a challenge. Then getting obviously finished products out to customers both in the United States and across the globe was a challenge. I think keeping employees safe has probably been the biggest challenge. And we have, as an industry, we have a few things going for us in that, manufacturing, some types of manufacturing sort of comes with social distancing built in, because these factories are fairly spacious and you don't have quite the density that you might see at a corporate office, right? But equipment manufacturers spend a lot of time thinking about how can you continue to make the equipment that feeds and builds and connects the world than doing it safe. And I think that's going to continue to be the challenge for our industry going forward, as we continue to sort of deal with these challenges. And I think finally, there's a policy challenge. The federal government has not done enough. They've not stepped up to meet these challenges in a way that I think most of us were hoping they would. I mean, not to say they haven't done anything, but I think that they have not done enough. And heading into next year with a new Congress, a new president, it's going to be a very challenging environment. I don't see it being any less partisan, probably more. And so, compromise will be hard fought and hard won. And I think we need our elected officials to continue to make sure that, whether it's, retailers, manufacturers, agri-science companies, technology companies, that we can keep our employees safe. We need therapeutics, we need a vaccine, we need policies that are flexible. And then, they need to kickstart the economy. I'm sure everyone on this panel would agree that, the future, the way to move forward, right? The way to a better future for all of us is to jumpstart the economy. So, let's do that and we'll all get to work.
So now I understand that we have Jeffrey with us. Hello, Jeffrey. And let me go back to that initial question, which kind of ties into this one. Can you just talk about a few of the fundamental challenges that have arisen across the energy sector in particular, and with the economy-wide impacts of COVID-19 on things like domestic foreign travel, stay-at-home orders, all of that?
Sure. Thanks. And hopefully I'm working now. The great thing about going last like this is you get to respond to some of your panelists' assertions. And so, I'd agree with a lot of what's been said. And, fundamentally, some of the big changes that have happened in our industry and in the energy industry is that as these supply chains have collapsed, as travel has lessened, and as we've all stayed home, we've used less energy. And it fundamentally shifted and altered our business in ways that we hadn't really anticipated, we weren't ready for, and we were fragile in ourselves, in our own production. We were an essential business, and so we never stopped working. Our employees were always in the fields in North Dakota and New Mexico and Texas and Pennsylvania, and those folks kept working the entire time. But the demand for our product did change, and it changed fundamentally, and we tried to respond to that. But one of the things that has not changed is that energy undergirds everything that my fellow panelists have talked about. Supply chains and the movement of goods and services around the country and around the world depends on energy, and it depends on petroleum products in a large measure. And although some of that is changing as we transition our energy economy, fundamentally at the end of the day, trucks for Walmart don't move unless they move on petroleum products at this time. Machinery that KIPP produces and that Kearns farmers use, they generally rely on our products. And so that demand really lessened, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't still stay a really important part of what we do to produce that energy for those products. We talked about resiliency a lot and the need for strong supply chains, and we couldn't agree more. American energy producers 100% want to supply that cheap and affordable energy for the goods and services that are moving around the country. And so we're anxious to get back to a place where, in a post-vaccine world, we are moving. And I'm on an airplane again. Mario said he hadn't been to the office since March 13th. And, I haven't been on a plane since about that time. And that's really unusual for a guy that's been on a plane every week for the last, 10 years or so. And so we really need to get back to that. But that's, the demand for our product is really the fundamental change that we saw. And reacting to that and really structuring our businesses in a different way to be more financially flexible around that demand change is one of the most critical things that we've been facing.
Well, that's kind of the perfect transition now, because I'm looking at the Q&A from our attendees, and I'm going to open this up essentially to those questions from the audience. And let me start with this one for you, Jeffrey, because this is from an anonymous. How is this new incoming administration Congress going to affect WPX's energy and the energy sector as a whole, when thinking of like what seems to be some discouraging remarks that we've heard on the other side of the aisle? How is WPX Energy and companies like yours, how are you going to adapt to this new Congress and, of course, divided government?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. First of all, I happen to be a fan of divided government. I like the, as a creature of the Senate, I like the slow pace of legislation. And I think some of you may agree with me as well. But it certainly is going to be a change, and it's a change in tone. It's a change in direction. it's something that we acknowledge, and we're ready to have those conversations. I don't think that anyone in our business would tell you today that they don't see an energy transition underway. We all see an energy transition underway. It's how we get there, and how our economy and how our fundamental way of life exists in that transition that we are all talking about now. An incoming Biden administration is going to be focused a lot more on climate than the previous administration. And I think rightly so. There is certainly a place for energy companies who are producing the vast majority of American energy today, and North American energy, I'll say, not just U.S. energy, but North American energy today in that conversation. We have to talk about how we transition and how we get cleaner, how we do a better job of maintaining our social license to operate by making sure that things like methane emissions and CO2 intensity and emissions come down. And we have to have meaningful conversations along those lines, and I think we're prepared for that. And this is a perfect opportunity with a change in administration to really dig into those conversations.
Okay, now here's another question from Joel De La Cruz, who's asked several. He has posed several questions, but let me start with this one, and this one goes to essentially all the panelists. But what do you guys think on a future potential trade deal with the European Union? Why don't we start with Laura, because I cut you off in the last question. What are you thinking about a future deal with the EU?
Yeah, and I saw some of his other questions just on trade landscape. So, I think we're excited about, revisiting a lot of the trade deals out there. He was talking about, TPP in China and the EU and UK specifically. And I think, the more we can use trade deals, work with our allies to open markets and make American manufacturing and retail and everyone competitive, I think it is going to be great. And it sounds like the incoming administration, congressional leaders on Ways and Means and Senate Finance are more than willing to talk about all of the above. And, USMCA, which we were very supportive of, set a good bar for kind of where American trade negotiators will kind of come into a new Congress and a new administration.
Okay, who else wants to answer that? Karis, Kip, Mario, Jeffrey?
I guess
I'll take a stab.
First,
Go ahead.
First. In agriculture, we've really been excited about the prospects of a conversation with the EU. Now, having said that, we're not naive that it won't be a difficult conversation to have. Biotechnology has been evasive in that conversation for quite some time, and we must engage in that conversation. But we also recognize this climate and sustainability conversation that's about to take shape. And so one of the things that we fully expect is in the United States, a broader conversation around climate and the sustainability. We've got to have the tough conversation. We've got to do the hard regulatory work in the United States first. And that will empower us to take that conversation to a much more global stage, because we do recognize that the EU is further along in their conversation around climate.
Okay, Mario?
The future of trade is interesting and exciting at the same time. Transatlantic partnership, the TTIP agreement, is it time to dust that off? Maybe, I don't know. A lot has changed since when we TTIP. The United Kingdom is now is moved out of the European Union and the UK have to negotiate their separation agreement. Still a lot of issues that have not been addressed there. Certainly is it, as I mentioned, multilateralism is certainly something that we should look into again. I think there's also an opportunity to leverage the wins that we have on USMCA, certainly in the digital chapter of USMCA, to really think of what the future of trade looks like, not just trade in goods, but trade in services and also those items that support the digital economy. The WTO has a joint statement initiative on e-commerce, and certainly the issue, and this is something that we haven't talked about, but is important for many of us, is tariffs on electronic transmissions. Can we imagine a world where electronic transmissions are subject to tariffs around the world, that we wouldn't be able to get our Netflix movie in the same way that we do today. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, again, for us to lead, for us to work with partners. There's also an opportunity for us to also look at the wins that we've accomplished over the last 4 years in trade, again, USMCA being one of them, and look at how we can inject new disciplines into new agreements.
And Kip?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what Mario said. I think, look, the continued needs and acute needs of the post-COVID-19 economic recovery, as well as, continued international challenges that we face, whether it's a rising China and more antagonistic China, or other challenges, climate change, for example, it's going to necessitate the United States and the European Union moving closer together. And obviously the Europeans need to get their house in order first with sort of the future relationship with the United Kingdom and what that will look like. But I think a multilateral approach, right, which is historically what the U.S. has advanced on the trade agenda, on its trade agenda, is where to go. We cannot go it alone in this world, no matter what politicians tell you when they're running for office, right? And then sadly, some of them while they're still in office, we've got to work with our partners, and whether it's the Europeans, whether it's the Japanese, the Australians, only by working with them can we actually hope to affect any change out of China, for example. So, do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? Unfortunately, I've been in this town for too long. So my optimism has taken a hit, but I think you'll see, obviously, with the new administration, right, there's, and who knows what's going to happen in the United Kingdom with their politics. There's always optimism, right? There's always a fresh start. I think the Biden administration has signaled that they're interested in a more multilateral approach in working with allies. So in that sense, I am optimistic, but it will take some time. Trade agreements are extremely complex, as everyone on this panel, Molly, right? And so, but I think as long as we're moving in that direction, as long as we are embracing the world and embracing trade, as opposed to trying to distance ourselves from it, I think we're on the right track.
And Jeffrey?
Yeah, I would say, from an energy perspective, free trade agreements are, something that the United States used to not really have as big a say in, because we were an energy consumer, not as much an energy producer. But really the revolution that we've had in energy production in the US means that the opportunity for the United States to engage in multilateral conversations around trade, specifically with respect to North American energy being exported out of the country into allied nations, is something that is new. And it's something that we deeply want to see, deeply feel that needs to happen. USMCA was a great start. Certainly conversations with the European Union need to move forward. There are, as Karis mentioned, there are a world of differences between what the EU needs in a clean form of energy that needs to be imported into the EU. We know they don't produce enough of their own. They're heavily reliant on the Russian regime as it stands now for gas, for instance, to power manufacturing and heating across the EU. We think the US has a unique role to play in providing a clean form of energy for our partners in the EU. The question really becomes the details over climate. And do we have a border adjustment tax for carbon, for instance, going into the EU? Do we have a pathway to determine what our exact footprint is for the molecules that would be entering into the EU for LNG tankers? And we really think that we can. The Biden administration, the incoming Biden administration's focus on climate, I think will help drive the U.S. energy industry into those conversations in a way that we weren't before. The question is really in the details of how we get there and how we determine exactly how the EU can access our molecules in a way that fits their climate goals.
Okay, and then one last question that we have from the audience from Christian Lopez. And this again is for all of you guys, if you can answer in the way that we answered before, Laura, Karis, Mario, Kip, Jeffrey. To wrap this, should the United States try to restart a trade deal with Asia, in particular China, or should the U.S. find a way to pressure China through other strategic partnerships? Laura?
I think it'll be interesting to see how the current administration leaves the trade space. and how we need to, move ahead from there. China is a strategic partner, regardless how you feel of some of their policies. And, China is a big sector for Walmart. We have many stores there and work closely with the government. But we also understand the U.S. government have been working closely with them as they consider, when they were working on TPP, as well as discussions directly with the government. So I think kind of an all of the above. Let's see where we are come next year and go from there.
Karis?
Yep. I think it's important for us to manage and measure all of these expectations, right? So even in the question in and around the EU, Trade Promotion Authority is going to be a challenge for an incoming administration. So that's kind of in the background of all of this conversation. So as exciting as it could be for conversations with the EU and or the ASEAN region, there may be a less of an appetite to continue these trade conversations in an incoming administration. Having said that, a good starting place could be a China phase 2 portion of a conversation. Phase 1 is already there. And how do we continue upon the successes and the agreements that have already been built? We do recognize that the RCEP, which is a recent regional trade conversation that was just brokered, has meant that the Chinese have not sat back while we've plotted and planned our next move. And so seeing that regional trade and cooperation is happening in the ASEAN region, the question is, what commensurately will the United States do? Multilateralism has been telegraphed by this administration, and it looks very promising for us going forward. But we're going to have to continue to make progress in the global landscape, but most importantly, in and around what's already been done.
Mario?
Yeah, I think I'm well aligned with Karis and his last remarks there about the pivot. Much has changed since since 2016, particularly with respect to U.S.-China relations, the ongoing dialogue that we have with China, and then also what's gone on in South Asia. RCEP was signed, but RCEP doesn't include India. So how does that play into the broader landscape in Asia? I think there has to be, again, some thoughtful engagement. Do we restart the SNED? Is it called something different? But is a strategic economic and security dialogue with China something we start up again, which then feeds into our strategic engagement with them on a phase 2? How do we deal with RCEP? Do we think about integrating ourselves into RCEP, or is it dusting off TPP? No, TPP moved on without us. It's called something different now, but it's there. So there is no easy easy answer to this very good question. It really depends on what the priority is. Is it a rebalancing trade in Asia? Is it a security play entirely? Because we have other trade agreements that we can rely on, maybe multilateral ones. And how does India factor in to the broader security and economic interests that we have in the region?
Okay, Kip?
Yeah, I think the answer is that we don't really have a choice, Molly. And I would echo Karis's concern about Trade Promotion Authority. I think it is going to be a real challenge to get that extended. I think it expires at the end of June, and I think the President-elect Biden, assuming that he is our 46th president, I think we'll face some challenges from the left wing of his party on that. And so whether he can get that or not will remain to be seen. But RCEP is interesting. It's interesting because it's giving China two key advantages. Number one, I think it has now created this narrative in that part of the world that China is the real leader with all the influence when it comes to trade and rulemaking. And that is a problem for the United States, which has always tried to position itself as the leader on free trade. Second, it is actually breaking down barriers to trade with China at a time when the United States is busy creating more barriers to trade with the United States. And so those two advantages, right, is I think is flipping, the narrative. Free traders in America and free traders around the world have spent decades building up. This agreement has just flipped that on its head. And so we're going to be challenged to reclaim our status as the leader of global trade But, as I said, to answer your question, we have no choice. Now, whether or not that is a new TPP, whether it's, RCEP plus us, whether it's greater engagement with India, to Mario's point, we'll have to see, but we can't wait. I mean, we're going to be sidelined real quickly if we don't do anything.
Jeffrey?
Yeah, I agree. I think with all the prior panelists here, one thing that I would say is that, as we look at ASEAN, it is the largest growth segment for energy consumption in the world. And we can't ignore the fact that there are deep energy needs in places like India as people who are deeply in energy poverty are looking to change that and are looking to grow into, a more middle class. Energy is, part and parcel of that growth. And so we can't ignore that. That growth can be sated somewhat by the United States' energy abundance and North America's energy abundance. And I would say that, the Biden administration, one of the best tools that they have in engaging in this sort of diplomacy is the fact that they can come in and say, we have affordable and abundant sources of energy for your growing economies. China cannot do that. China is a deep energy importer and will continue to be a deep energy importer. And the United States and North America can come to the rescue for a lot of those nations around ASEAN and say, look, we have a role to play here that no one else can play. We can provide you the sources of energy in a way that no one else can provide you, and use that to build alliances in a way that we've really pivoted away from over a good period of time here. I won't say 4 years, but a good period of time. And the truth of the matter is it's very important for us to do that because, as all the prior panelists have said, China is not sitting back on its haunches waiting for us to figure out what we want to do. It's forging ahead. And if we want to play a role in that, we have to be assertive and aggressive in that.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. Your expertise and wisdom, I'm sure, has informed our participants, and they've certainly informed mine. And before I pass this back to Marianne, I just want to say thank you to the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute, join in with the panelists for letting me be a part of this. It's such a great experience, and I appreciate it. Marianne?
Yeah, no, thank you, Molly, again, for your help in navigating all of these experts. I also loved how everybody was able to add on to what everyone else said. It's great to see these industry perspectives when we have a collective point of view that we can rally around for the greater good of the Western Hemisphere and also for the United States. So thank you all for that. A special thank you again to Mario and Intel, Laura at Walmart, Karis at Cortiva, Kip at AEM, and Jeffrey at WPX. Again, thank you so much. If you can just stay here for now, let me just do the final closing remarks, might as well. I want to thank everyone again for joining us for our 9th annual Trade and International Affairs Symposium. And my last thank you is to the team at CHLI, to Mario Villacres, the host behind the scenes here, to Gabriela Matos as well, and Ana de Mendoza, Nicole Marin, Christian Cubas, Stephen Holloway, and Maite Sands. Thank you all very much for your support. Hoping that all of you have a blessed holiday season. We don't have another big program until the new year. So wishing you all good health, be safe, take care of each other, and God bless. Thank you.